Andrew, I'm going to now sort of hand over to you, give a slight introduction to what you do. So Andrew is of a legal background. He was a lawyer. Then he moved into becoming a director in the civil service, a very senior position, discovered mindfulness there himself individually, and then thought about how it could be embedded on a team and organisational basis and how you could take it into leadership. So how can mindfulness help empower leaders in the roles that they do? He's written a book on it, written the book on organisational mindfulness. So he'll talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to have a bit of a chat and a discussion. But as I said, if there's anything that you hear from Andrew or from me where you think I want to know more about that, or that makes me think of a question, please pop it in the chat, because we'll leave some time at the end for you to all ask Andrew some further questions. So Andrew, can I start by asking you about your own kind of route into mindfulness? And how did you get?
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks for asking me along to do this, and thanks for the Mindfulness in Law group and Mindful Workplace community as well. And thank you for everybody for turning up. It's wonderful to see everybody there, and it was a great practice as well. And it's lovely. I loved what you said about when you open your eyes and being in a community of practice, because one of the things which has really helped me getting through this weird and pretty horrible year has been a sense of community and practice. And my journey with mindfulness starts a fair time ago. So as you said, I started my career in a law firm, studied law, and then in my mid-20s moved into the UK civil service, and I found that project management was something which really resonated for me. And I worked in the justice system for many years, so all of the years of experience that I'd had in law were incredibly helpful and incredibly applicable. And the skills and experience and knowledge of communication, tight deadlines, relentless work demands, and all the other joys that I found in my experience of law in the firm that I started off in were just put me in really good stead for a career in project management, which was also a very tight deadline type of environment, and relentless one too. And so I worked in the civil service for many years, and I found myself doing increasingly challenging roles. And I was actually working, doing the program assurance for the UK government on the Olympic and Paralympic Games for London 2012. And if I'm honest with you, from very early on in my life, I'd found that thoughts could be troubling. I could find that thoughts could get out of hand, and I could often find myself catastrophizing, considering that the worst case scenario was definitely what was going to happen when there was no evidence that that was the case. And at this particular point in my life, things just got on top, I think is the expression. And I reached out to a friend of mine who happened to have a mindfulness practice, and perhaps unsurprisingly, he suggested, why don't you try mindfulness? So I went on a retreat for mindfulness, and I spent 2 wonderful days in a farm in Suffolk doing these mindfulness practices, not knowing what to do. And I have to say, for anybody who is on this meeting who's new to mindfulness and not experienced it, or in early days, I have to say that this friend of mine had discovered mindfulness at the age of 18, so a long time ago, and I had come in to discover it at 42, and I had been richly skeptical about his path. You know, I absolutely thought, you're doing this whole mindfulness thing, that's lovely for you, but I'm off, I'm making money. And I was working in the civil service. That probably wasn't a brilliant career move to achieve that, but that was what I was doing. I wasn't interested in this sort of stuff that he was doing. I respected it, but I didn't think I needed it. I didn't think I had any interest in it. It didn't have a place in my life. So as I say, for me, it was just when things got challenging and I was struggling professionally and I wasn't enjoying my home life, and it was a difficult time. And so he said, try this. So I did. And at this weekend event, there was a logic to what was being presented. If my thoughts are the problem, perhaps if I can have a different relationship to my thoughts, that might help. And it was as simple as that. It was just the logic and I thought, well, I'll give it a go. So during the next 3 years, I literally got a book out of the library and I read it and I did what it said in the book. And that was the basis of my practice. And I did that for about 3 years. And to me, evidence was key. You know, I wasn't going to do this just because it sounded nice. It had to work. And I found it was transformative. And over the next, during those 3 years, I've fairly rapidly found that I was not only able to deal with the level of stress which I was experiencing as a senior leader in the civil service, I was able to, people were putting me forward for other jobs which were more stressful. And I went for it, and I got it. And I can't guarantee anybody that mindfulness will help with a promotion, but I happened to get a promotion within about 2 years. And I found myself the head of assurance, head of program assurance for the Ministry of Justice. So all of their projects and programs over 30 million quid were coming across my desk. And it was fine. I was thriving in that space. I was loving it. And I went on a program for senior project leaders called the Major Project Leaders Academy, run by Oxford University. And I had no intention of telling anybody that I was doing this mindfulness stuff, because I just thought they're senior leaders. They're going to think I'm really weird, and this is a good networking opportunity. So the last thing I'm going to do is talk about that. And it was like an MA. So there were 3 residential weeks, and as you can probably tell, I'm quite garrulous. So after in the first week, we were talking about leadership stress, and I said, well, I use mindfulness, and I literally expected them to sort of pick up their trays at dinner and move to the next table. And bless them, they actually didn't. They were biting my arm off, saying, what is this? How does it work? So by the 3rd week, by the 3rd sort of session, in the 3rd week, they asked me if I could do something on mindfulness, and I didn't feel qualified. So I got a guy in to do this thing. And I sat there, and I've rarely been so scared, to be honest with you. There were 30 senior project leaders, Ministry of Defence, scary people. And 29 out of the 30 said that they got something from it, and the other one was polite. And I thought, I'm taking that as a win. I'm running with that. And that kind of gave me the confidence to bring it back into the office, back into the workplace. And so I just started mentioning it and describing it to colleagues and my team, and we did workshops on it. And this kind of built. And over time, I then left the UK civil service and spent some time outside. And then I was asked to come back. And for those in the UK, you'll probably be familiar with the Grenfell fire tragedy. And I got an email about a week after the tragedy saying, can you help set up a program to look at building safety? And it's kind of obviously, if I can help, I'll help. And for those who aren't familiar, this was a tragedy where in a high-rise building, 72 people lost their lives because of a fire. And it called into question what was going on with building safety in the UK. And so I came in to this incredibly intense environment. I mean, it was, number 10, the Prime Minister was constantly interested. The media were all over us. We had to build a team from a very, very small base into a massive team, which ended up over 100 people, and we had to do it in no time at all. And there was a lot riding on it. It was intense. And it was emotional as well, as an environment. And in that time, for the first 3 months, my mindfulness practice got me through it. There's no doubt about it. It was having a capacity to have a different relationship with my thoughts, to be able to understand that sense of inadequacy, or that sense of we're never going to achieve this, or this sense of this is too big, was a thought, and it would pass, and then we'd crack on, and we'd do what we could, and we'd keep on doing the very best job that we could. And I started there for 3 months, and I ended up there for 18 months. And it was both the most rewarding and the most challenging period of my professional career to date. And in that time, as I say, I kept it to myself again, because I thought, I don't know these people. I've just recruited these people. I was a director. There were other directors. And I thought, I need to establish myself. This is a new department. I've just come back into the civil service. And after 3 months, again, I sort of took my career in my hands, and I said to the boss, the Director General, I want this to be a mindful program. And again, I thought, there's a theme you'll probably pick up here. I thought she'd say, thank you so much for your time, Andrew. It's been lovely working with you. But to her credit, she didn't. She said, what does that mean? And that was really the opening to go, yeah, what does that mean? And so we took a load of actions, which I might go into in a minute, about bringing mindfulness into the organization. So as well as offering it to individuals, how do you make an organization mindful? And that led me to think, seeing the outcomes of that, so skipping to the end, like kind of punchline, one of the directors who left shortly before me described how she had found that the senior leadership team had been the most collaborative that she'd experienced in the whole of her career, and that she put that down to mindfulness. Now, for most of you will know that senior leadership teams, maybe even partnership teams in law firms, are not always collaborative, may not always be quite as cohesive as one might hope. And for her to say that when this team had been under such intense pressure, and that she put it down to mindfulness, was for me a game changer. That kind of said to me, this is something I really want to do. This is something I really want to pursue. And it was at that point that I decided to set up a consultancy and go into bringing mindfulness into the workplace. And that's when I wrote the book. So that's a very long explanation of how I got into mindfulness.
You can sort of feel the intensity of some of the experiences that you had, and how your mindfulness was kind of, getting you through it, literally, in some circumstances. So I guess going right back to the beginning, when you were having these initial chats with people, and mindfulness now, I think it's fair to say, is much more mainstream than it was a few years ago. So there was definitely this sense of, oh, I sort of practice it, but I'm not going to talk about it in case people think I'm, a bit weird, a bit of a hippie. But when people asked you about it, how did you sum it up? What is mindfulness to you?
So I think mindfulness is as simple as just learning to have a different relationship with my thoughts and be present in what's happening now. So, the classic descriptions are around present moment awareness, being aware in the present moment. For me, it's very, very practical as well. It is being able to have that different relationship with my thoughts, so that if my thoughts are running away from me and talking about, I don't know, this presentation is going to be a nightmare. Half of these people are going to leave the meeting before the end of the hour is up, and everybody's already bored. The people whose faces I can't see, they've already nodded off. Any of that, I can go, yeah, well, that might be true, but it's just a thought. And bringing my attention back to, Ruth just asked me a question. Okay, what does mindfulness mean to me? And then I can give the best description, which I can, which is, or to be in this moment, and do the best that I can in this moment. And what I found is that on a very practical level, that alleviates stress incredibly. It does two things. It enables me to perform better, because I'm actually now listening to you, Ruth, rather than worrying about the consequences of what I say next. And it also enables me to reduce the stress, because I'm listening to you, Ruth, instead of worrying about what's going to happen next. So on those two levels, mindfulness is a pragmatic and practical tool to help me address my thoughts, which sometimes can get out of control.
Definitely. Thank you. And when they said to you, what does a mindful program look like? What was the answer? What is a mindful program? What is organizational mindfulness?
Yeah, thank you. Well, yes. So this was a big challenge, because I had to explain this and I didn't really know what I meant at the time. So I went away and thought about it. And if I can, and thank you very much to, I think, is it Tracy, who said in the chat that she's still here. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's lovely. So if I may, I'll share a few slides which can perhaps illustrate what I had in mind. I promise you it's not a whole slide deck. It's just excellent. People are still here. That's lovely. So let me just share this, if I may. Okay. So to explain what I meant by a mindful organization, I felt I needed a model, partly because I'd been spent too long in the civil service and program management, but they tend to have 4 quadrants, and this really helped articulate what we were talking about. Firstly, for me, it was a bit about being mindful about the vision. So in this particular scenario, this is a building safety program. We are being bombarded with emails, ministerial demands, ministerial statements to the House of Commons. All sorts of stuff is going on, deadlines. We have so many buildings which we need to check. It's very intense on the deadlines front. So it's very easy to lose sight of, why are you doing this? Why are you running this program? Why are you putting yourself through this? So having the capacity to raise your gaze, if you like, to move away from the immediate moment and to bring your attention, or the immediate challenges rather, and to bring your attention to the vision of what's behind this activity, I feel was incredibly important. And in the legal context, for me, this is about being able to step away from the client who's badgering you for a particular outcome, and stepping back and seeing the whole picture of the case, understanding what is the objective, what are we trying to achieve with this particular submission, what's happening with it, stepping back at the bigger picture. Mindful about delivery. Are the actions I'm going to take next going to help me achieve the vision or not? And for me, the analogy might well be around billable hours. It might well be around success in the particular case that one's transacting. But it's about, is this going to help, or is it superfluous? Is it unhelpful? And sometimes the decision can be something which may not be billable. So it may be, okay, taking 10 minutes to ask George how his kids' parents' evening went might actually mean that George is really on side for the rest of the day. And if I don't do that, he may not be. So it may not be as straightforward as getting this piece of billable hours work done, but being mindful about delivery. What are the activities that we can do that are really going to help? Being mindful of each other. So going back to George, I don't know why I'm picking on George, but being mindful of each other, noticing the team. In this situation, there was a lot of stress and a lot of people were working incredibly long hours, weekends, all the rest of it. And noticing where there were cracks occurring, where were people's behaviors a little bit off. I think that was really important. Not least, tying it back to delivery and the vision. If people fall off and they are off with stress, or they're unwell, then they're not in the team. And so you're losing that support within the organization. You're losing that support within the resources that you have. And then finally, mindful about ourselves. And this is perhaps the piece that most people are familiar with mindfulness, the well-being angle. And for me, many of you will be familiar with this, but very briefly, the oxygen mask principle. The idea that if anybody can remember the last time they're on a plane, in the safety announcement, when they talk about the oxygen mask coming down, they say, put it on yourself first before you try and help anybody else. And for me, I always used to think, well, that's crazy, because my kids are here, or if there's a vulnerable person there, I'm going to try and help that person first. No, you're not. You're going to pass out. So put the oxygen mask on yourself first, then you can help somebody. And that was so important for me to be able to, and leading by example, being able to say, do you know what, I've done enough weekends. I need a couple of days to myself. That was really important. So setting out in a understanding that mindfulness isn't just about my practice. For me, it's about how do we share this experience, that idea of community, Ruth, that you said right at the start with the practice. And this was the way that I sort of articulated it for the team. And then looking at the whole organization. So people, yes, we did training. We offered training to people. We had drop-in sessions. We talked about it openly in the team. I'll never forget the first time that I did a session a bit like this, but it was to the new team, and I talked about mindfulness, and I talked about how it had been hard. And this guy came up to me at the coffee shop, at the coffee afterwards, and he said, "Thank you so much. That was so great. It's so important to hear senior people talking about mental health issues." I was kind of like, I didn't, did I? And I was going, of course I had. I talked about the fact that I was under a lot of stress, and that was fine. So actually being able to, one of the great things which we did was unlock that conversation about work can be hard, this can be challenging. And senior leadership support. So getting, I think it was very hard for people to mock me because I was a director. They might have done it behind my back, but they weren't going to do it to my face. It was impossible to not take us seriously because the director general was behind me. So if you're a partner in a firm, you might want to get a senior partner or an equity partner who's going to be backing you in this, because I think the senior level buy-in is really, really helpful. Grassroots and senior. Processes, boards, meetings, email protocols, and workflows. How do you bring mindfulness into that? Well, a great example, during lockdown, my wife was working from home and was not copied into an email. And immediately the question was, why haven't I been copied into this email? And normally she would have been able to go up to the tea point and say to the person, you didn't copy into the email. And they would have said, oh, I'm so sorry, won't do that again, absolutely fine. And it would have been done. But it couldn't be done because nobody's in the office. So suddenly it's like, do I send an email? Do I phone somebody? All of that could have been avoided by just being mindful of who's on the copy list. How have I phrased this email? How would I feel if this email landed on my desk? Would I be angry? Would I be upset? These tiny moments of mindfulness in how we work and how we deal with our processes, absolutely radically changing. The reason we had that collegiate sense in the building safety program, I am absolutely sure, was because of our every senior team lead, every senior leader team meeting we had started with a practice. Started with a 1 minute practice. And then products. So very, very briefly, I love this bit, but for me, this how we deal with client reports, marketing documents, strategy documents, and internal communications, the way that we put them across can either lead to mindfulness and awareness, or can lead to distraction and missing things completely. And this came to light for me on that same program in Oxford, where a guy called Paolo Cotoni, who's a professor of accountancy in Manchester, and my apologies for anybody who's an accountant on the call, but I saw that he had a day and a half on this program, and I really thought I was going to have to chew my leg off to stay awake. And it was amazing. It was life-changing. And his basic thesis was that the Jesuits had invented double book accounting in order to create a space for the senior monk and the finance monk to discuss where the money was coming in and where the money was going out. And what we've done now is we use double book accounting to just get to the bottom line. And his premise was, you, program managers, do exactly the same with highlight reports. And I suddenly realized I'd wasted 15 years of my life because I've been producing incredibly professional highlight reports saying these are where the risks are, this is what's going well. And of course, the senior team would receive that and go, oh, somebody very professional has got a grip on this, and move on to something which was in crisis. It was the way that I designed it, which either ensured that it drew their awareness to whatever I wanted them to be aware of or not. So for me, it's about people, products, and processes. And then finally, just to say that we take action all the time in every workplace, and law firms absolutely, to achieve shared present moment awareness, but we do it very badly. So the classic example for me is a program board. What is a program board, or a board meeting anyway, about, apart from trying to get a group of people to have a shared moment of what's happening in the present moment, a shared moment of awareness. But what actually happens is everybody comes into the meeting, they're thinking about the last meeting, they're thinking about the email or the conversation they had coming into the meeting, they're actually on their phones, so they're not in the meeting at all, or they're thinking about the next meeting. And the idea of being aware in the present moment is something which I've rarely seen in program boards. And you can transform that by just doing a short practice at the start of them. So conscious, there's a lot there, Ruth.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's fascinating, and definitely related to that bit at the end where you talked about being present in meetings, and being present in internal meetings, but also in client meetings. I think iPhones and Blackberries when I was a trainee have a lot to answer for in terms of this kind of multitasking that can go on within law firms. So I guess picking up on that, if you're a senior leader, or if you're not so senior but you're wanting to kind of get the ear of senior leadership when it comes to mindfulness, the world of law is so kind of time orientated. So every 6-minute unit or potentially 15-minute unit is accountable for. How do you justify taking that time out and creating the space when you have client deadlines that are looming and you could be doing something else?
Absolutely. So I mean, there are two answers to that for me, really. One is that from my own experience, I know that I'm more effective in those 6 minutes and those 15 minutes if I have a mindfulness practice. Simple as that. So I know that if I don't practice, then my mind wanders and I'm less present and I'm less able to be effective in whatever it is I'm doing. But the other part of that is there is an awful lot of evidence around this. It's not me telling you this. There is a raft of over 4,000, I believe, published studies into the benefits of mindfulness around leadership, around collaboration, around decision making. If you really want to make effective decisions, then if you're not present in that decision making process, if your head's somewhere else, how can you possibly make the right decisions? And you also have to look for comparative behaviors. Why is it that organizations like SAP, GSK, Roche, EY, HSBC have such large and substantial mindfulness programs? It's not because they like kicking back and spending time on cushions. It's because they can see that there's a benefit to their organization and their people. So yes, there is an unquestioning well-being angle to this. It helps me be present in work because I'm able to manage my stress more effectively. And that's definitely been my experience, and there's lots of evidence around that as well. But it's also, for me, it's about pragmatic delivery. And that's why I framed the model as I did, actually. It's around, how do I hold on to, what's this case about? What am I doing stuff which is going to help me win this case? Am I aware of the people around me so that I have their support at the end of the case? And am I looking after myself so I can see the case through?
Yeah, great. And going off that last point that you just talked about, what can I do to win this case? Law is obviously a competitive environment, can sometimes be quite litigious depending which area you're working on. And sometimes you might think, actually, there's an advantage in me sending off this email at 5:30 on a Friday, right at the end of the day, passing it over to the other side. That's a tactical advantage. How does mindfulness kind of sit with that when you're trying to embed organizational mindfulness? How does it affect your competitive edge?
I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to win a case. and the wonders about mindfulness is that I don't think it particularly requires us to question whether we should be winning. I don't think that's right. So I think for me, I would put it down to, if there is a case for taking an action, whatever action that is, to get a piece of work done. So my analogy, I suppose, would be, there was an incident in the program that I described where there was another possible risk, which didn't actually come to pass as being a real concern. But it meant that we had a major piece of work to do. And I had to work all weekend for several weekends. And that was something that I had to do. And that was absolutely fine. But what I was able to do then was to step back and recognize that I'd been doing that. And that was really hard. So that was something that I had to assess. So it gave me clarity, if you like, around the actions that I was taking. And whether that's about my well-being, the actions on the other side, the impact on the other side, the ethical behavior that I'm taking, it's about achieving clarity about my choices. I suppose that's my answer. It's about, it doesn't give you the answers, it gives you the clarity to find the answers.
Yeah, and that sense of perspective and kind of wider picture. So not just doing something automatically because it's your habit to send off an email at 5:30 every Friday and get it off your desk, but being able to actually pause and think, does this email need to go? What's the intention behind me sending this email at 5:30? Rather than being on this constant kind of treadmill where you are just reacting to everything.
You're absolutely right. That capacity to respond rather than react. I think for me, that being in the treadmill of just being in at weekends, because that's what I did. And I did that a lot, which is why I didn't end up in a terribly well place. But being in weekends because I know that's what I need to do for a while and then I won't is a completely different thing. So it's making the choice and having the clarity to make that choice.
Yeah, great. I'm conscious that I'm doing a lot of talking, everybody. So if anybody does have any questions, please do pop them in the chat so that I can ask them to Andrew, because I've got loads of questions that I can keep asking him. So I will keep going. But if we get any in the chat, I will make sure that I come to them at the end. So please do put any forwards that you're thinking about or reflecting on. And there is no question that is kind of too simple to ask in this forum. We really encourage people to ask anything they'd like to about mindfulness. So it really is about bringing this curiosity to every single question that we're exploring. So we'd love to hear what you have to say. So Andrew, I want to kind of really drill down into lawyer mentality. I think, when you were talking earlier on about catastrophizing, that definitely sort of registered something in me from my own experience as a junior lawyer before I discovered mindfulness myself. And I would have a tendency to catastrophize, to think, Armageddon was going to happen before it had. And I'd sit on my desk worrying. I was a worrier. And no one would necessarily know that was going on because I'd keep it all internal. But in a sense, lawyers do come from a background. They've done some studies in the US where they look at, particular lawyer traits of perfectionism, being risk averse, potentially catastrophizing, because that is what you're sometimes getting paid to do for your client. So you are getting paid to look ahead and think of all the things that could potentially go wrong so that you then mitigate the risk for your client. So I was just wondering, it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on how that sits with kind of coming back to the present and present moment awareness.
Yeah, well, I think that is all about having the different relationship to our thoughts as well, Ruth. For me, that capacity to, I say this a bit in training because it seems to resonate with people. I would be able to be heading towards a meeting and think that I was going to be late. So before I was even late, in my head, I was late. And then I think, who's in the meeting? Oh, my boss is in the meeting. My boss is in the meeting and he's going to think I'm an idiot. And he's going to think I'm an idiot. And it's coming out to review time and I'm going to get a bad report and I'm going to lose my job and I'm going to lose my house and my kids are going to be destitute. I had destitute children on a fairly regular basis because I was running late for a meeting. My capacity for my thoughts to run away from me was not insignificant. And I don't think I'm unique in that. So being able to literally bring my attention back to what's happening now. I'm a little bit late for this meeting. Just helps me, because then it gives me the clarity and the peace of mind to be able to be present in the meeting rather than worrying about my homeless children. And that was an incredibly powerful gift, because I was able to do it in lots of different settings. So slightly less dramatically, what would often happen is when I'd be going into a meeting, I don't know if this happens today in law firms, but in the civil service, there are meetings, there used to be meeting rooms, and lots of alpha people would kind of gather and be very alpha outside the meeting room, talking about how wonderful their weekend was or how wonderful their weekend was going to be. And I would try to do a very short practice just to bring my attention to now. And then I would go into the meeting, and what I'd notice is people were quite agitated at the start of the meeting, and I'd be fairly calm. And I'd be able to sit there, and I found that my brain was working. I wasn't saying their brain wasn't working, but that helped me. It helped me to be present. So this capacity to catastrophize or to be distracted, for me, it helps me get clarity. So yes, our job can be to catastrophize for the client. A lot of my job was doing risk analysis for risk registers and risk mitigation strategies. So yes, you can think about the worst case scenarios. That's part of your job. But then you get a clarity about it. You get a distance from it.
Yeah, and not taking that same catastrophizing mindset into the rest of your life can be a very, very useful skill to have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to just broaden it out now, Andrew, because I'm sort of aware we're more than halfway through, and come to sort of when you talked about your original take up of mindfulness, it sounds as though there were moments when it felt quite lonely because you weren't talking about it with other people, you were kind of keeping it to yourself. How have you dealt with that? And I'd like to bring in specifically the kind of the community aspects of what you've built up with what I know is the Mindful Workplace community, and what you see its role as in terms of helping people and supporting people when they're on this path.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, well, I am enormously proud of the work that everybody's put into the Mindful Workplace community, because very briefly, I know that the help and contact and connection I have for the organisation which predates the Mindful Workplace community, which was called the Private Sector Working Group, helped me enormously. It gave me confidence that I wasn't just this weirdo on his own. I was a weirdo with other people. I was able to be not alone, not the only voice saying this stuff. And that gave me enormous solace when I was in an environment which really didn't get it and wasn't yeah, it wasn't always very sympathetic, and I felt very nervous about telling anybody about it. So when I was asked to work in establishing the mindful workplace community, it was kind of like, yeah, absolutely. And I know, for example, one person who is a member of the mindful workplace community who was on the verge of leaving not just their mindful network in their organization, but their organization itself. And that person is now at the head of an organization, which of a network of thousands of people globally who are practicing. So, so having that kind of support and infrastructure was really key. And so we started at the start of the year, and of course we had no idea. You know, it was January. Remember January? And we had a launch booked. We had a lovely building in HSBC, all very swish in Canary Wharf in London. And we had a hurricane the night before, so that was good. And we thought, will anybody turn up? And we had 90 people show up, and it was a wonderful event. And then we had all these sort of events planned, and then the world changed. And so we had to move online overnight. And it has been such, I mean, don't get me wrong, I wish it had been for other reasons, but it has been absolutely wonderful for so many reasons moving online. And it's been wonderful because we are now talking to our friends in the US, in other parts of the world, and it's become a genuinely international connected community of people supporting each other, inspiring each other, sharing best practice, sharing inspiration, sharing products, really practical things like questionnaires that you can send out at the start of your program. You know, from everything from inspirational speakers, some incredible speakers we've had, senior psychologists, senior leaders within EY, GSK, Roche, and so forth, right through to very practical and pragmatic things. And having that connection and having the events which we staged has been wonderful. So yes, it was lonely at the start. It took a bit of courage, if I'm honest. But the wonderful thing is now with the mindful workplace community, I don't think it needs to be like that because people can be connected. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think community, we've all sort of appreciated the importance of community in lockdown and during the pandemic. And as you said, going online for the mindful workplace community initially seemed like, you know, this is not what we planned, but let's go with it. And it has resulted in it being really international and being great to see people from all over the globe joining and giving their input on what they're doing within their organizations has been fantastic from my perspective. But I'm going to now invite you, Andrew, because I'm sort of conscious of time. Would you be able to lead a short pause with everybody, partly so that practically I can look through the questions and see what I'm going to ask you next, but also I think that this is quite a good kind of example and demonstration of creating pauses throughout the day to kind of help you come back to what's going on right now rather than fast forwarding.
Sure. So I'd just like to do a very short pause, which we actually did at the start of the senior leadership team meetings in the building safety program. So just as Ruth said, if you're new to practice, it's helpful to have a nice, alert but comfortable position. So feet on the floor, perhaps hands loosely clasped on your knees, and closing your eyes or lowering your gaze. And gently bringing attention to maybe the sounds around us or indeed the quiet. Maybe noticing the temperature in the room. And gently bringing our attention to the breath in the body. Noticing perhaps the rise and the fall of the shoulders. Movement in the back and the belly. Just noticing. And gently moving our attention to the very start of the in-breath. Where do we notice that? Is it the tip of the nose or the back of the throat? or somewhere else in the body. What do we notice about it? Is it sharp, cool, or warm? Just noticing. If our mind wanders, that's absolutely fine. That's what they do. Just with kindness, bring our attention back to the very start of the in-breath. Now gently moving our attention to the very end of the out-breath. What do we notice about that? Is it warmer, softer, just the same? Just being curious. Now broadening our attention to the whole of the breath in the body. Noticing again perhaps the movement in the shoulders and the back and the belly. Now broadening our attention still further to notice perhaps the support of the chair beneath us and our feet on the floor. Noticing the sounds around us or the quiet, and perhaps the temperature in the room. And then when you're ready, just opening your eyes if you've closed them, maybe wiggling your fingers and toes.
Thank you, Andrew. That's lovely. And I realise just for everybody's benefit, I know this session isn't a session on what mindfulness is or what it isn't, but just to kind of follow up on Andrew's practice, if you didn't feel relaxed, that doesn't mean you did it wrong. Mindfulness isn't about feeling relaxed, it's about noticing what's going on with you right now. And also you might have noticed your thoughts wandering off all the time and your mind wandering, and that is completely normal, and you are part of a very exclusive club called Humanity if that happened. So yeah, just kind of emphasize that if because I know we don't really have time for a debrief on the practices themselves, but I'm going to move now to questions, and if it's okay, I'm going to ask the people who've posted questions in the chat if they'd like to ask them themselves. So when I say your name, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, that would be brilliant. And if you don't sort of speak within the next few seconds, then I will ask your question for you. But first up, we've got a question from Emma Williams. So Emma, I don't know where you are because there are too many people on my screen, but...
Oh yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So my question, you probably get this a lot, was that if you encountered any kind of naysayers or sort of haters or doubters, which I'd be amazed if you didn't encounter at least a few of them, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things which we did before I did that practice, before every board meeting, was I said, if you don't want to do this, if you can just sit quietly, that would be great. Because I was conscious that some people may feel, I had one person who actually said, this feels a bit like religion to me. And there may be completely legitimate concerns why people don't want to do it. People might just be very skeptical and not want to do it, and that's fine. But what I was doing was making it available, and we had conversations. I've had conversations around having compulsory mindfulness, and we decided, one, it's unethical, and two, it's very hard to track. But one of the things which I noticed was in those senior team meetings, there was one guy who was even older than me, and he was we didn't get on. I'd come into this organization, I tried to bring loads of new stuff, and I just knew that me talking about mindfulness just wasn't going down very well. And as I say, I was there for 18 months. And just before I left, we had another away day, and all the deputy directors were on the podium, and people were asking, what was it like in the early days? How did you cope? And out of nowhere, this person said, well, that's where mindfulness came in. And I nearly leapt up and hugged him.
Wow.
So I think for me, it was something about having the courage to realize, this isn't for everybody, yeah? And that's fine. But making it available may encourage people to give it a go.
Love that. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
The next person is, I think it's Chapin.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. So I'm really interested in the organizational level and the organization itself, thinking about creating a culture of mindfulness so that you could say the organization itself was mindful. And I just looked at the table of contents of your book and noticed at that chapter this phrase about asking, how do you normally eat your elephants? And I just wondered if that was, I wondered what that was about.
Yeah, so it's a really bad joke, which is, how do you eat your elephants one bite at a time is the joke. And the idea is that, I was working in the civil service in the UK. There's hundreds of thousands of people in the whole of that organization. So how do you make that a mindful organization? Well, start here, start in this bit, start in this meeting with this group of people to have this conversation about introducing mindfulness. And then if you get momentum, then think about, for me, it was about programmatizing it. So what's your plan? How are you going to target your senior leaders to get the buy-in? How are you going to use your communication strategy to reach this, make this available, make it accessible to people? How are you going to train people if that's what you're going to do? So to try to both accept that one has to start somewhere and to build it up, and also to have a plan.
Thanks, that makes sense. It's sort of what I thought you probably meant, but that helps. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And the final question before I sort of do the closing is from Tessa Hollingsworth.
Oh, yeah, so on a similar vein, it's sort of around, that sort of organisational side and how you embed that. And a lot of what you've been saying sort of sounds like it's around sort of habits and habits forming. And it was just interesting to sort of know more about how long that took to sort of change those habits, and were there any sort of setbacks in that process?
Absolutely. There was one guy who joined the senior leadership team after we'd kind of started it all, and he just didn't get it. And he kept on coming in late in the middle of the practice. And it was kind of like, this is really challenging. And I think my only advice is to keep going. You can't affect organizational change without really looking at the culture. And how do you change, it's that horrible expression, isn't it? That's culture strategy for breakfast, or the other way around. And it's how do you actually get to the culture of the organization? And how do you do that? Well, you got to keep going at it. You've got to have courage, and you've got to keep going. So when you do face knockbacks, when you face criticism, or I would do a practice and I don't know, it just didn't gel, it didn't feel right, and then it was kind of like even more scary doing it the next time. But you just got to brace yourself and do it. And I think the thing which I'd say is, to achieve organizational mindfulness is perhaps a long process. To start with a group of people that you're comfortable with. So anybody who's new to mindfulness on this call, just to invite them to develop their own practice, and then join a community where you can talk about it and build ideas and see where you can go from there, and accept that it's going to be a bit of a journey.
That's great.
Thanks,
Andrew. I'm conscious that we've had a couple more questions through, and I'm really sorry if I haven't got to your question, and we'll make sure that we follow up afterwards, or if those people actually want to stay on the call at the end, we're totally happy to take the question then and deal with it. But I'm also very conscious of time, and time being a precious commodity, probably our most precious, so I don't want to keep people beyond what we said we would kind of hold this meeting for. But just to finish off, I guess this event has been organised by the Mindful Workplace community, which Andrew has talked about. I think, Andrew, you we're going to offer a special Christmas present
We are.
for people who want to join that community.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be able to say that we've negotiated a 20% discount for people to be able to join the community. I think it's not for long though, is it? It's until the 9th of Jan. So Teresa's going to be writing out to folk and giving you the code so you can go onto the website and make the most of that. So it would be lovely to see some of you there. Well, it'd be lovely to see all of you there, let's be honest.
Thank you. And the other thing to say is that the Mindfulness in Law group is also a group that meets monthly for talks and practice. And so we'll include information in the email about how you can connect in with them. Tessa, who was the last person to ask a question, is fundamental in helping to run that group. So if you've got any questions, please do just send those through afterwards and join the LinkedIn group so that you can kind of connect in with this sense of community. But I'm just going to wrap up the kind of formal timings there. But as I said, if the people who had questions want to stay on, please feel free and we can stay on for a few more minutes. But I just want to say a huge thanks to Andrew. It's an absolutely fascinating topic and I could literally talk to him all night, but we've got to eat dinner. So, so I will release him at some point. And thank you everybody who's come on this meeting. It's been really, really good to connect with you all and to sort of have this energy and anticipation about the potential for mindfulness in the legal workplace. I feel so passionately about, you know, the culture within law, the levels of stress that are within it. You know, sort of Junior Law Society, I think, reported 90% of junior lawyers reporting that they've felt stress in the last month. That figure is way too high. But as Andrew said, it's not just well-being and stress. There is so many kind of potential benefits to mindfulness. So great to have this conversation and for you all to be part of it. So if you do stay on, lovely. If you have to go now, thank you very much and enjoy your dinner if you haven't had it yet. And I'm very pleased that the Labradoodle did not interrupt this webinar. So thank you.